wanted to add to the Know Your Enemies video that I posted recently, because I want us to be able to not just to say know your enemies is it's almost vague. So I wanted to be a little bit more specific in saying we need to identify who our enemies are. And although it's easy to look outside of ourselves, and in my video, I think I mainly alluded to looking outside of ourselves to see who our enemies are. But there's also an enemy within that most of us do not pay attention to. Most of us don't acknowledge. And if we only take the time out to know thyself, which is knowing ourselves, we will soon discover whether or not we are our own worst enemy. That is a thing. A lot of our self-talk has been programmed into us from childhood, and a lot of our self-talk came from how our own parents or caregivers made us feel about ourselves. So there was a time I had to seriously pay attention to my self-talk because it was really pretty bad. And for the most part, you can look at a person and tell what their self-talk is, at least for me. I can. You can see it in the way they walk, whether they walk confidently or not. You can tell in the way they talk. And not necessarily even about themselves, just the way they talk, the cadence, their tone. And while we may focus on the enemies without us, outside of us, we need to pay serious attention to the enemy within us. And none other than the great Sun Tzu from The Art of War. I think I'm saying his name right. Sun Tzu, Art of War. He says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. That's the piece I was talking about when I say when you know your enemies. Because then you won't have to fear them anymore. Right? So he goes on to say, if you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. Which is why you need to know who your enemies are. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. That means you lose every battle. And I didn't even know this quote all the way, but I know there are quite a few quotes about the enemy within. I just stumbled upon this one this morning, which is one of the reasons I wanted to add to the Know Your Enemies video. It's very important that we are able to identify the enemy, whether the enemy be our self-talk, how we feel about ourselves. There's a lot of hatred within a lot of people, and that you can also see if you're observant, pay attention, from how their diet to how they take care of themselves, to who they choose to date, who they choose to have in their lives, not having boundaries, will definitely allow the enemy to seep in, whether a physical enemy or a psychological one that affects how we feel about ourselves. So we have to be mindful of the enemy on all fronts, within us and without us, outside of us. So initially I was going to, when I said, let me do one that, a video that talks about identifying the enemy. I also wanted to give the definition because I don't recall giving the definition on the last video. But it says that an enemy is someone who is hostile and actively opposes your growth and peace of mind. I did mention it, but I didn't mention it as the definition. But that is one of the definitions that I'm going with. That an enemy is someone who is hostile and actively opposes your growth. And anyone who actively opposes your growth affects your peace of mind. Now, I remember growing up as a child, peace of mind was not something that was afforded to me. I was a warrior, not war. Well, being a warrior made me become a warrior. But I was a warrior, someone who ruminates. The negative side of ruminating, someone who overthinks, overanalyze, really fretted a lot, which is what worrying is. Because I never felt secure because I didn't grow up with my parents, didn't grow up living with them from the time I was probably the age of 6 or 8. I was just all over the place because my mom didn't want to be a mother. So one of the key components I realized as I got older and started to have relationships, whether platonic, intimate, whatever, just any relationship with people, and it was confusion. Confusion in where you stand in a relationship, friendship, whatever. And I could tell you, for one, I was confused about the relationship I had with my parents, because at one point I was like, these people don't love me. I don't think they really care about me. I'm confused about that. How does that work? Because they financially supported me, and that was their number one thing that they were great at doing. I tend to look and identify with the financial report as well. Financial support as them not completely abandoning me. And I did grow up not feeling they abandoned me, because I didn't know what that term never came to mind. Not sure why. I just know I wasn't living with them. Wasn't too sure why. Kinda knew that my mom, because my father took my brother by the time he was 12. And my mom was responsible for me, but she wanted no responsibility, like full-time responsibility of me. So I was still kind of like confused about that. But as I got older, I started to pick up on certain things that quelled the confusion. But outside of that, anytime you have a relationship or a friendship with someone that is confusing to you, where you don't know where you stand, you should seriously question with the possibility or the hopes of moving on. Because or at least distancing yourself in a way where you could be on the outside, really paying attention, looking in at the relationship and the person. Because there should be no confusion about where you stand with people, regardless of the relationship you have with them. There should be no confusion. If you can't have a conversation to basically clear up or get some clarity and get out of the confusion, then yeah, you may have to reevaluate even more. Now, for the most part, I don't like confusion. I just remember feeling it a lot as a child, and as I got older, especially when I was in an intimate relationship, that was one of the key things that allowed me to end a relationship fairly early, fairly abruptly, without explanation sometimes. There will be a conversation about how I feel, and based on how the person responds or whatever steps that needed to be taken, if nothing was being done within a very short space of time, because I was also impatient when it came to my feelings. I never liked to feel inadequate. I never wanted to feel like I was burdening anybody either. I also think that came from the fact that my mom always felt that I was burdening her. So I never wanted to feel like a burden. So that is also another thing that will easily have me step aside, step back, and, take a bird's eye view from a distance. So a lot of times the enemy, especially from a biblical context, creates confusion, comes with confusion. One of the things, too, a telltale sign of an enemy is whether or not they have love for themselves, which is self-love. Because if people don't love themselves, they can't love anybody. So it's so interesting to me how people will just accept somebody saying, I love you, just like that, without paying attention to how that person who is telling them that they love them treats themselves, takes care of themselves, honors their word, respects themselves, have some form of self-worth and self-value. All those things are interconnected with self-love. That's another not telltale sign that that person is an enemy, but I can tell you, if that person isn't helping you grow and is hostile about it, for example, you're in a relationship, you know what your goals are, you may have expressed this to your partner, you're trying to achieve them, and because they lack the confidence or the self-love, they'll find ways to chip at your confidence in trying to either get you to not achieve your goals or focus on your goals, or maybe reevaluate your goals in a way for you to basically doubt whether or not you can accomplish your goals. Those little things, as little as they may be, and they're not little, but some people look for like major situations to happen, like physical hostility. Words can be hostile. A person's energy can be hostile, and it doesn't even have to make you flinch, or they don't even have to flinch. The person's energy could literally just be like, I hate you. You feel it, but then the next thing comes out of their mouth is, I love you so much, and you're like, huh? I ain't feeling that though. Pay attention. That most likely is an enemy in the midst. And if you don't pay attention to the psychological or the psychological manipulation, which I just gave you an example of, someone saying little things like, what are you doing? Like, you can't do that. oh, really? You seriously think you're going to achieve that goal? Or whatever it may be, anything to plant seeds of doubt is an enemy. We need to pay attention to that and develop psychological boundaries against that. I had a lot of that happen to me throughout my not early childhood necessarily, but going into my teenage years and going up and going, as I started to love myself, as I started to gain confidence, you would have a few people who came and didn't like the fact that I smiled all the time. Didn't they just wanted to erase. My mom was one of those people. I would remember even hanging out with my friends and she would be somewhere around and I could feel her staring at me, and seething, and if I made eye contact with her, she'd be looking at me like, giving me the look as if to suggest, why are you like, what's all that excitement? Sometimes I think I remember a few times she's telling me like to calm down because I was so happy. He's always like, calm down, like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, I'm happy. I'm having fun. Um, which is, I guess, explains why I've never done anything fun with my mom. Her and I have not. I mean, fun for her is is shopping. It wasn't fun for me, especially the way she did it. But there were also times too, like after that particular event where I was happy and I'm hanging out and I'm chilling and everything like that with my friends, she would literally come up to me and be like after everything is done, or if, whatever it is later on, what were you guys laughing about? Because, she was a gossiper and all that stuff. And I was like, oh, we're just talking about school, or we're talking about this, or we're talking about that. But I wouldn't give her any details, and she'd be like, so why you had to be laughing like that, or what was so funny? And did it, like, just downing, trying to like ruin the moment, even though the moment passed and all of that stuff. She would still try to find a way to minimize or make me, feel some type of way for being happy or for having a good time. I never really grew up looking at my mom as the enemy. I just knew she didn't like me. And I questioned if she could ever love me. And I remember getting a lot of toxic positivity about it. Oh, it's your mom. You only have one mom. How could you say your mom doesn't love you? And I know that's a thing that a lot of people have a problem with. Oh, they're your parents. You should never speak bad about your parents. You should honor your parents. It's like, don't speak the truth about your parents. I was listening to this other YouTuber, has over a million subscriber, and he was talking about the Colin Kaepernick situation, about how dare he imagine he was adopted. He should be grateful. It's kind of like, okay, he was adopted and he could have been adopted by somebody who was horrible at the same, or had did some horrible things. Like, people make it seem like everyone that adopts or fosters children are fostering from a good place, out of their heart. And I'm listening to this guy and he's like ripping even though I don't agree with Colin Kaepernick to suggest that, well, the example he gave, there may have been other things that happened where it's easy for Colin Kaepernick to say his mother or parents perpetuated racism because they didn't want him to wear cornrows. Like I've said, my own mother, a lot of black mothers I know, didn't want their children or their sons specifically, to wear cornrows. It was a thing where they were like, you're going to be targeted. The same shit Colin Kaepernick's white adopted mother told him. You're going to be looked at as a thug. You're going to be, stereotyped, because that's a thing. That is a thing. So, again, I'd have to have full context. And I don't fully trust Colin Kaepernick's judgment. So, I don't know why everybody's having a tizzy fit because of what he said. But because who feels it knows it. And I'm not sure that's the only thing his parents did. Why he would say it perpetuated racism. If anything, it perpetuated a stereotype. I mean, even when white guys got their hair cornrow, they were cornrows or whatever, they looked at them, because most people who got their hair cornrows wore baggy jeans. The whole outfit came with like the hairstyle came with a look. Period. But this whole idea of how dare he speaks ill of his adoptive parents. They didn't have to adopt him. They made him who he is today, having all this money. So it's like having all this money should trump how he was probably maybe mistreated at some point in time. It's I just don't get people's logic. Okay, not all parents even like their children. That's one of the. I even saw one of those videos came up on my timeline this morning. A lady was saying that there's a Reddit thread. I don't go on Reddit, but apparently a lot of people do, where she says of people, mothers especially, talking about how much they hate or they don't like their children. She gave an example of one parent who was saying they don't like to be touched. And I'm saying to myself, I actually know somebody who personally told me that after having two children, they were like, they don't like being hugged. They don't like being touched and all of that stuff. And I was just like, what? By your child? Like, I could see you don't like being touched just by any random, because that's me. Like, don't be touching on me, because you'll get a reflex slap real quick, fast, and a hurry. But I always want to be hugged and touched by my children, and hug and touch them. I mean, at one point in time, I think I was smothering. Like I remember when it got to the point where my son would be like, all right, mom, okay, okay. And would, gently push me off because he was being hugged for a while or too long for his taste. And, the big first couple of times it happened, I was a little offended, but, low key. But I honored that. I was like, okay, well, I did hug him. I did get that in. But he doesn't want a 1 minute hug. He wants like a 30-second hug. Like, that's good for him. And I have to respect that. But to not want to be hugged, not like being hugged, this is what I'm trying to tell people. My mother was a living example of a mother who didn't want to be a mother who seemed to have been forced into motherhood because of societal pressures and pressure from my dad. According to her, if it wasn't for my father, she wouldn't have any children. So nobody is talking about that. Nobody is paying attention to the fact that parents can suck. I mean, at least the Bible knows that. Because while everybody is going around saying, oh, you need to honor your parents, you need to honor your parents, you need to honor your parents, and honor, they neglect the part of the Bible that I'm pretty sure is in the next verse over that says, parents, do not provoke your children to wrath. It works both ways, and nobody talks about that part of the Bible, which is so freaking irritating to me. It's really like annoying the hell out of me. So if Colin Kaepernick wants to come out and say whatever he wants to say about his adoptive parents, as long as he is being truthful and honest, and he recognized some form of racism from there, and even racism was tripping me up. It was tripping me up a lot. And that's another thing when it comes to knowing your enemies. You need to teach your children who the enemies or enemy is or are. And I know in the Black community, we're always told to look at the white man as the enemy. But I remember focusing on that for a while and then realizing that the enemy is also in our own Black community or your own community, wherever you're at. Enemies are everywhere. It's not just one group or one set of people. And I just told you as I started, the enemy can also be within you, right? The things that you yourself perpetuate upon yourself and even to others. But I'm mostly talking about being an enemy to yourself. So it also made me have to. So one of the things I was confused about, why, and it's still hard to call my mom an enemy because I felt like she would support any business idea I had, but that's because she loved money and she was a business person. My father wasn't really a business person, and he was a miser for the most part in how he spent his money. I mean, he was still supportive later on in life because when I was younger, as he later told me, he didn't really have it, and my mom had her businesses and she was thriving, so she was the breadwinner. But I used to get confused with my mom, you know, because she would cook for me, give me make all my favorite dishes. Even when we moved to America and she lived in another state, there were times when she would make things and box them up and ship them to me. So I would always get confused because I'm like, well, she's doing all these things, so maybe she does love me. But I realized that caring for someone and loving someone are two very distinctive things. They may look alike or look like they connect, but love and care, completely different. And once I found that out, I was no longer confused. Confusion left because I do not like being confused, as I've said earlier, at all. That's also another way the enemy comes in to entrap most of us, because you get more bees with honey. You get more. Let me see, if you're a true predator, which I am not, but you sniff out the weakness in people or your prey, whoever you want to prey on, PREY or PRAY. You sniff out the weakness and you adhere or avoid, because avoid can be a weakness. Like when I watch all these shows with For My Man and where women get with men who with males who are no good for them and lead them down to a big old dangerous rabbit hole that causes them to end up locked up for years because of criminal activities that these males got them sucked into. As a parent, when you don't give your child attention or love or certain care, when you don't support them in a certain way, that creates a void. And as soon as, especially for a female, as soon as she can find someone to fill that void, that hole, that need that she didn't get met by her parents or her caretakers growing up, trust me, because it has happened to me. The only thing with me is that I'm sharp. As soon as the person promised to fulfill that void or that need, and it was fulfilled temporarily, and then I started to see some weirdo movements, for lack of a better term, that's when I would be like, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I've always been hip to the game that males play. It's like, let me put a hook on with some, I don't know, Gucci bag. Well, that's not me. You couldn't get me with material things. You had to get me with attention and to really show that you had some kind of respect and love for me. That's how you would get me. I was definitely a hard nut to crack. But males are persistent and they will find a way to wear you down, even sometimes through annoyance, they'll wear you down. But yeah, so one of the things I wanted to tackle before I go any further is the fact that even the Bible says that a man's enemy will be those of his own household, right? And the first murder in the Bible was between two brothers, Cain and Abel. So even with me and my family now, since my mom passed and her memorial funeral, things have been really sketchy within the family. The family dynamic has changed drastically. And I can't believe I'm going as far as to saying or seeing my father, Dusty Devil Dad, as my enemy and my brother. But I think my brother has been, even to say it, I mean, I can say it now because it's come to that, it's reached its peak. My brother has always been jealous, and I believe there's some envy there. It's not just jealousy, and there's a difference between jealousy and envy. I don't like either of them. They are interconnected, but envy is the one that will do the most harm to someone. Jealousy can come in waves. At least that's how I've been jealous before. It's come in waves where you see something, you're like, oh, I wish I was, or I wish I had that life. And then you're like, girl, that's when I'll count my blessings and I'll be like, girl, I'm good. Or like, girl, like, yeah, I'll just get out of it like that fast. Unfortunately, though, some people hang on to jealousy, but I think jealousy, it starts with jealousy and then it turns into envy, especially when you really want what that person has and you'll go out of your way to either get it from the person or make that person's life a living hell because you don't have what they want. That's envy. That's my understanding of envy. And I've never allowed anybody to get that close to me to exercise that much envy, but I've been exposed to some of it. And let me tell you, I ain't afraid of people, but there are certain energies and spirits that I don't want nowhere near me. I don't want it anywhere near me. And as far as I can go away from it, that's where you'll find me, in the opposite direction of whatever, like a jealousy spirit and, all of that, what all of that entails. Because I just don't have time for it. But just know, for the most part, if somebody is constantly jealous of you and especially has envy towards you, you have an enemy. One of the things I don't think a lot of parents do, and that's what I wanted to touch on when I said that when I grew up, I was always told that the white man was the enemy. And then I later found out that sometimes the enemy was literally within my own community. But one of the things that I definitely don't see a lot of people doing with their children, especially here in America, is that they don't teach, like, certain things I grew up hearing. Show me a company and I tell you who you are. Or just be careful of your company altogether. I don't really hear that as a sentiment in this culture in America. It's like, so to me, a lot of times when issues happen with teenagers among themselves, killing each other or for whatever reason hurting each other, it shows that there's definitely a void in detecting who is who and picking up on who. But this whole idea of like knowing who's around you, knowing who your friends are different from your enemy. It's just like in a Bob Marley song, he says, sometimes your best friend is your worst enemy. Your enemy can be also turned to be your best friend. So we just have to be aware, self-aware, and teach our children. It's especially after seeing that incident with the Dalai Lama and that little boy. I mean, hello, somebody. You know what I'm like? How are we not teaching our children? Boundaries is one of the ways to teach children to identify who the enemy is. Even now that I'm saying enemy like a bunch of times, I still feel a certain discomfort in using the term, because it just sounds so like hate. Hate is a word, or even an emotion, and even an emotion that I don't want to even adhere to or focus on, because I'm pretty sure it takes a lot out of a person to hate. I've been there and I had to drop that shit like a hot potato. It's not good. Not good for your soul, not good for your psyche, And I probably should say this on the video I'm going to make about the boundaries that I've set for my children and how I've raised my children with boundaries. But one of the things that for sure with my children, I've even created a boundary for my children against me, or with me being a factor. Like, for example, I remember when they were young and they would be doing things and they're like, I can't. I would tell them right away, don't say you can't. Don't ever use that word. I would like be telling them like you have to be careful of your self-talk and what you say to yourself. You just have to be patient. You just have to take your time. And if you have to walk away from it for a minute or two or a day or two, that's fine. But you need to get back to it and try. So I've told my children, don't even allow me to get into your psyche and tell you can't do something or say something that makes you feel less than. Don't accept that from me. I don't know how easy it would be for them, but the simple fact that, because your mother is such, like, I know even with my mother, even when I found out who she truly was, she still was able to affect me by the things that she said, even when I didn't want to be affected. But, I would tell them, don't allow me to speak to you a certain way. Don't, check me. That's why when I hear people talk about, oh, honor your parents, like parents are out here doing the best. Oh, and that's another thing. I have a couple of videos about people saying parents doing their best. If their best is being the worst, then I guess we could say they did their best for a lot of people, because a lot of people did not get the best from their parents. If we're going by the definition of what best is, maybe an attempt at being the best. Not even at being the best, at being good. Some of them weren't even that good or decent in their treatment towards their children. So I don't even, you don't know. Look. You have biracial children. I believe it's on TikTok. I don't have a TikTok account, so I've only seen it through anybody who posts the videos on YouTube. But you have biracial children out here outing their white mother for the racist and colorist hatred that they have to, and that's how I see racism. If this whole idea of somebody just stating facts about another race is racism to me is ridiculous. There has to be a certain level of hatred behind what a person is doing to another group of people for me to consider it racism. And as far as I know, that's the true meaning of racism. Either way, everybody want to get caught up in the nuances of it. That's their business. Whether people want to go around, I think Candace Owens was one of them who outed this particular trend, as she calls it, on TikTok of children outing their parents and talking badly about their parents. And I believe she brought the whole honor your parents and how it's disgusting to not honor your parents and you don't get favor from God if you don't honor your parents. Again, not bringing up the provocation that a parent could cause a child, or even seeing the parent as an enemy. It's like the minute you say you're a parent or mother or father, you are absolved from being the worst, even if you're the bane of your child's existence in the worst way. Not in a cute way. Oh, you're the bane of my existence. No, but in the worst way. So I really take problem. It's really problematic to me that whether it's a trend or not, the only reason why I'm believing a lot of the things that these biracial children are coming out and crying about is because if you haven't listened to any of my previous whatever, when I've given little tidbits of my background, I'm from a multicultural, multiracial family on both sides of my family. So we have everything in our family. Everything in our family, okay? So I have biracial cousins. I have aunts who are white women and all kind. So I've seen it and I've heard it. I grew up with an aunt who she could pass, but she wasn't. She's multi whatever. She has the color that she could pass for white or definitely mixed or up in that close to whiteness. And I remember her telling me when I lived with her, oh, nothing too black is any good and stuff like that. Like real ick towards dark skinned people. And I remember hearing all of that. My own mom have said some colorist things and she's darker than me, which I used to just laugh and be like, the gall. Like, how you get off criticizing somebody for being dark when you're dark? It was always just weird to me, like a lot of stuff. And I used to find it comical. I ain't even gonna lie. But it permeated in some of my cousins' psyche and they've acted in a way that they've felt entitled because their white mother gave them the impression that they needed to be entitled. Now, if that ain't the enemy, I don't know what is, because I'm sure when they came to America, they got a culture, they got a rude awakening. Because I know a lot of people who were flexing in Jamaica because of their light skin tone came to America and realized, no, you're just an N-word like the rest of them. So, like, go sit back there, hold the back seat back there with the rest of them or whatever. But I don't know. I don't know. I shouldn't even be going as far as I'm going right now with this, as because I'm saying identify the enemy, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm saying identify your parents if they're your enemy. But hello, I mean, at what point in time are we gonna stop with this delusion and the omission of parents, of what the Bible verily says, that parents can provoke their children to wrath? This is what is happening. What people want to consider a trend of these biracials going on TikTok and exposing their white mothers. This is what provocation looks like. That's the wrath that's coming out. That's the response. You know, it's like when I would hear males talk about why women are like the way they are now, because it's a response to the way you males have been treating females for decades. Patriarchy. It's a response to patriarchy. And they just look at me like, huh? And I'm like, well, that's what it is. It's a response. That's what's happening. You try to hold a female down, she's saying, you can't hold me down no more. I'm rising up. And even if I'm gonna go out there and be half naked most of the time to show you you can't hold me down or tell me what to do, that's what I'm gonna do. Even if I'm gonna go out there and show my ass and look ridiculous as hell, that's what I'm gonna do. It's like from one extreme to the next. You know, it's all a response, and we're living in the age where things are being revealed. Look at what the Dalai Lama did, you know, in front of the world. Um, you know, with that little boy. So that's a thing. That's the world that we live in, unfortunately. Um, so we just need to identify, but you know, like Sun Tzu says, it's important to identify the enemy within as well as the enemy without, because that is also a thing. And we need to create boundaries for these enemies, or for anybody, especially people who don't have respect for you. We need to create boundaries for them. And I can tell you this much, if that person is truly an enemy, they are going to hate. Hate, and I'll use the word hate because that's exactly what's going to happen. If they are truly an enemy, they are going to hate every fiber, every ounce, every inch of your boundary. And to me, that's wonderful because that identifies them quicker, and that should make you move even faster to how you're going to navigate with them. I mean, interact and navigate around them or through them or however you want to proceed. But that in itself brings you peace when you know who is who. Like my mother would say, you need to know who is who. You need to know, you know. I have conversations with my children with who they call their friends all the time to assess what a friend is. Do they do this? Do they do that? I mean, my daughter is a little bit more open, where when she has her disputes with her female friends, you know, they're females, hormones, all that stuff going on, and females can be catty and can be the worst. You know, we'll have conversations about that. And I've expressed some things to her that she needs to pay attention to with her friendships. And I'm not sure if she's paying attention, but I know that I put the bug in her ear. All you gotta do is plant seeds with these children. But a lot of the parents are not having the conversation. So how are you even planting a seed? But I know one thing for sure. When I posted that video about know your enemies on YouTube, I remember I said to my daughter, because that was actually the first one I edited solo. I didn't even have to call her. I think I only had to ask her one question, but she didn't have to come look at it. She didn't have to whatever. So if it's messed up, forgive me. I'm still learning. But she definitely understood the assignment, because when I said to her, I said, is it important to know your enemies? And she's like, of course, like, absolutely. And I was like, why? She's like, so you know who they are and you know who doesn't like you and you know how to maneuver. She used the word maneuver. And I was like, okay, so you get it. So I was like, okay, so if it's one thing that I taught her, it's that. But I've taught her many other things. But I wasn't taught to identify any enemy except for the white man. And I can tell you this much, that I've experienced more enemies, and that's not to absolve the white man from being, an enemy or whatever, but I've experienced more enemies in my own culture and race or whatever than any other group of people. But my head is always on a swivel, so I'm always picking up on who the enemies are, and boundaries are always on deck. So if you want to have a peaceful and quiet life, you should definitely identify who your enemies are. Know who they are. Know who they are. Thank you for listening, and please comment, like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for listening to Bright Boundaries, and I will catch you on the next one.